all systems go. Clear for liftoff. What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, aka ToeTagginTambo, back for another edition of Leverage Lane here on the SHIPIT Nation YouTube station. Going to talk all things single entry through 20 max for Week 7 with my guy Alex Blickle. I know we got a ton of good feedback so far, Alex. People are loving this show. If you wanted content like this, now you've got it. A lot of people like the focus on the single entry stuff, so hit that thumbs up on the way in. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Alex, Week 7 ahead, man, but we had a decent Week 6 going through some stuff. What's your thoughts on the Week 6? And then we'll get into all things Week 7 ahead with ownership, how to leverage the common build, ownership in ways you haven't heard before, and then we'll talk about our light at the end of the lane once we get down the path. No narrative street, just leverage lane, like we always say. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Doing very well. I liked what you kind of mentioned on Mayo's show yesterday, kind of talking about how this is the part of the season where pricing gets a little bit tighter, correlation means a little bit more. And I think we're starting to see that this week, where if you took the Dallas game off of this slate, the conversation would be how ugly this slate is and how there's no great stacks. But I also think or at least that there were no stacks that really stood out. But now I think the fact that game does exist, it's consolidating ownership. It's giving us some clearer lanes to leverage, of course, and it's also giving us some options to play into that game. So I think this sets up as a really nice, fun slate. And I also thought last week I played it pretty well. I just made one mistake, and actually that one mistake kind of took me off something great. I had Flacco, Chase, Jacobs, and Kraft ready to fire up, which that felt pretty risky at the time. Having seen what Flacco and Chase just did to the Steelers makes you think, oh man, that was even better than I realized. But came off of it for a Chargers double stack. We talked a little bit about this yesterday on the Mastermind show, but I felt like I made a mistake playing Keenan Allen when I was our ownership was the only ones in the industry that had Keenan Allen as a chalky guy. I had him at 21%. He came in at 23%. Second highest in the industry was 14%, and I played him. So I don't want to make that mistake again, but I think that this is another week where I feel really strongly about the ownership, and I think there are going to be some real ownership advantages, and I think there are going to be some advantages in terms of just finding some really good separators. So very excited for this week.
Well, one thing for you for certain, you have a ton of sharp takes. People are all over them. They work out quite often, but just go on them the next game out. Like your Nico Collins for the Millie. Oh, no, not going to get you that this week. But the next week, I'm going to just break the slate and crush the Browning stuff with everything like that and the Flacco takes, and then it becomes like Flacco's just rollback game. Even I teased it in our Discord because everyone said, here comes Aaron Rodgers. I said, all that to throw a pick, just kind of give him shit a little bit. He comes back and does it. And then I teased it because I'm obviously a former Ravens fan. Everybody knows I love them and had to defend Joe Flacco being elite for all those years. But I said, too much time for Joey Flacco. You guys left him too much time. This guy's elite. And of course they came back. T. Higgins was the signature team player, got the job done. McPherson hits the field goal and the game's there. But that was an incredible Thursday night game. So we'll get into this. As usual, we're going to break down ownership, like I said, in a way you've never heard before. We talk about it from a single entry perspective. We talk about some of the combinatorial ownership where there's different groups and things that people are piecing together based on the chalk, how to leverage the common build, including the player combinations and the game stacks. There's definitely late swap things this week to talk about when it gets to that as well. And then we'll put it all together. The light at the end of the lane is never really dialed in until we go through those first two segments. But before we get into it, Alex, you'd mentioned it. By the way, I put it out there at 8:30 Eastern, I think, and it's already Go Collect has already got through it. So I'm going to do that stuff first quickly just to make sure people know, because I think it's important that they see what we're up to. Like we're dialing it in. We're getting things dialed in across the board. And if you guys haven't checked out SHIPIT Nation, go use code SHIP19. Join the nation. You can get in and try it out. Alex did join me. If you go here on SHIPIT Nation and click Mastermind, it'll take you here. You can scroll down to join today. It's a one-time payment, so you can join once or you can join with a equal 3 payments. So for less than $100, you can get in and I'll show you the interview. So Alex and I talked yesterday for over an hour and 40 minutes, going back and forth about his history and how he plays and his process and single entry and satellites and ROI and literally everything possible you can think of, and just great things about life. But this is the one I think too, a lot of people are talking about over the last week. I just posted in our Discord. If you're looking to leverage the Stone and Saber Sim and how it, like, we have how-tos on the site, but Nades and I did an hour of breaking down how we use it particularly. So I think this alone is worth the $99 to get in the door, but just check out SHIPITNation.com, click Mastermind. And then if you want to make sure you're in with Alex, he'll tell you more about what he's got going on, but he explains it all right here in this episode. All right, Alex, let's break it all down. We've got ownership to talk about first, and I'm just going to have a look here. The one thing I will say this week is it looks to me like we are getting a very popular quarterback for once. Like usually we say like, oh, they're all pretty much 12% and under, and it's not even the one I want to say no to. It's actually Jaden Daniels who's getting popped up the most, and he's $100 less than #NeverMahomes. But what are your thoughts on the original ownership by position, just to get a general idea for people out there, because there's a lot of different takes on it with the weather game and all these different factors as well.
Yeah, I think the first thing that we need to kind of be a little bit patient with is the Deebo Samuel stuff. We think he's going to play, but we don't know he's going to play. We also don't know if he's going to be full strength if he plays. Like I kind of hope that he does play and is the clear fade in the game, because especially if he's going to be popular and he's going to be, the most common pairing for Jaden Daniels or the most common bring back to Dak stuff, I think that's at least a very easy way to say, okay, well, what if his foot really is just hurt and he can't do the things that he usually does? Because like that's his entire game, right? Like he's not some savvy route runner. His entire game is predicated on his ability to run fast and run strong. And if he can't do those things, he's not an effective football player. He's not an effective receiver. So I think that's my hope. If we don't get that, like now we're going to get some mega chalk, super cheap wide receivers in the 54.5 total with the super effective rushing quarterback. Like that's going to be a really hard thing to figure out. So we got to wait and see about that. But what we have this week is one very clear game that people want to play, and then two very clear mega chalk pieces that are extremely easy to play regardless of the roster construction that you choose. So Quinshon Judkins, we've got a 50%. Rashee Rice, we've got a 49% in single entry, and I kind of think that's going to go up to like 60% by the time we get to Sunday. So we'll keep an eye on those. But then Lamb, Deebo, Krosky Merritt's going to be somewhat popular. I think I've gotten projected well above market because I think anyone who doesn't play the Jaden Daniels stuff is going to make the very clear and obvious connection. Okay, I'll just use Krosky Merritt to leverage them. So yeah, Daniels, Zach Ertz, I think could end up becoming one of the most popular tight ends on the slate. So it's going to be jam-packed with ownership, but I also think it is so much better than any other game that it might not be something that we want to go away from. It might be something that we want to find a contrarian way to play.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's part of the conversation, because after Jaden Daniels, it's Mahomes who, fits with the Rice stuff. And just remember, a lot of that stuff is correlated. We always talk about it when we get there, but like, who is the chalk? Why are they the chalk? And then how does that sort of make everything? How is it connected? That's a prime example of how it's connected. And then the other thing is Dak on the other side, because originally, and even yesterday when Mayo, Squirrel, and myself were building out lineups, just the early first look type of thing, trying to put things together, it's like, okay, Dak is really hard to play unless we get some value opening up, because it was like Dak, Pickens is only $200 less than Lamb. Lamb is back. Ferguson is right up there as the second highest tight end right after McBride. It was like, okay, this gets expensive, especially if you got to use Deebo or Krosky Merritt on the other side. But then it was like, oh, wait a minute. Now these guys could be out too. And this could end up happening as far as like the Deebo stuff with McLaurin. McLaurin already out, waiting on the Deebo news, but that would open up the Luke McCaffreys at 4,100, the Moore play at 3K. So to your point, I think that nailed it. Give me your quick thoughts at what you're seeing at the running back position outside of Judkins, because I'm seeing him like way up there. And I think he's a whole conversation in his own because of the fact that I know he failed on a 78.5 rush total last week, which we talked about a ton in our Sunday show with Hoop and Title. And Title actually ended up having to bust out the crop top to a lost bet, even though Warren barely did anything on the other side for that game. Warren came back with a good game this past week. But just to note it, He's like a 98.5 or 95.5 rush total, minus 115 anytime touchdown, 21.5 rush attempts, juice to the over. Like you do all kinds of stuff with props and different things that you're looking at. Is Judkins just, I mean, the Vegas number and the projections, they all factor in this weather. There's still 36 points and there's still almost 20 for Cleveland. How do you handle that one? And then what else are you seeing at the running back position?
I think it's a really fun place to start is with Quinshon, and then we'll kind of go into the rest of the position. But I always like to use these rushing props to remind people what they actually say. Because on the one hand, like you're going to have a ton of people who look at Quinshon's rushing prop and they say, oh my God, it's 94.5, 95.5, whatever it is. Like we can't possibly not use him. That's the highest I've seen. It doesn't imply that he's going to go out there and rush for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. It implies that 95 is kind of a median outcome. But they're also probably not going to be throwing much. He has a receiving prop of 10.5. So like one outcome that's very much within his range is 80 rushing yards, no touchdowns, no receptions, and it's an awful DFS day. So yeah, it is a massive, massive rush prop. And it is entirely possible that he runs for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. This Miami defense is atrocious. So the ceiling by all means is wonderful. I even think the median outcome is good, but there is a very clear downside here. And I would say that he's more volatile than most running backs, especially most running backs who are this popular at only $6,000. So my initial instinct is fade unless I have a really contrarian stack that I think is going to help me separate. And then I'll just go to Judkins to say, I already have the edge. I just want you to preserve it for me. So that's my lean on Judkins. Rest of the position, I do have slightly different ownership projections at the moment than a lot of what's around the industry. I have Krosky Merritt as the second most popular at only 23.6%. Jonathan Taylor, 22.6%. Breece Hall, Javonte Williams right around 20%, and then Jacobs between 15 and 20. I think there's a lot of volatility around all of those guys. It wouldn't surprise me if I have some of them up at 30% by Sunday. It also wouldn't surprise me if I have someone like Breece Hall way down between 10 and 15%. I think he's the quintessential guy who is going to show up in first runs of optimizers. He's going to show up because of projections, and people aren't going to like it. And so the question is, are people going to end up trusting the optimizer, trusting the projection that they're being told, or are they going to use their own input and say, no, I saw how incompetent that offense was last week. I saw him get 22 rushes and still be an absolute bust. I'm not falling for that again against a much improved Carolina defense. So I don't know what people are going to do yet with Breece. I think that's probably like the one that can swing the farthest. As I mentioned, he could be 10%, he could be 30%. And I think you can make that same case for Jonathan Taylor and for Javonte Williams. You know, the Javonte stuff I think is largely like, what do people want to do with the Dallas receivers? Because obviously the more they use the Dallas receivers, the less they're going to use Javonte, but people are going to get a piece of Dallas one way or another. So he's kind of dependent on those guys. And then Jacobs is the other one where just about everybody is, I think, looking at Jacobs as like a luxury that they would love to have in their lineup, but he's not the priority because he doesn't have the 35 to 40 point explosion that a Jonathan Taylor has. So they're not going to force him in either. So another guy who he could be 15%, he could be 25%. And it's less about how people feel about Jacobs and just more about, do people land on that as an option in their lineups?
And also it's about late swap, I think, for some of these guys too. Like we saw even last week, Jacobs, so he's usually in the later window. And what ended up happening was he was lower projected, but then I think more people switched to him. Like Nades and I look at that on Monday mornings, and you see like his ownership got a much bigger boost after the fact, but it was based on some of the happenings of the morning and how it's all connected. The one thing I'll say, and you didn't really, you committed to it like what your projections have, but like you said, it's really hard to tell. And I think it is tricky and hard to tell with Krosky Merritt, because what happens is people often don't want to play the quarter. We always talk like, how is it all connected? People often don't want to play the quarterback with the running back. If they're on Jaden Daniels, and we know they are in some way, shape, or form, I know it's only 20 out of every 100 are on him, but I'm saying if he's going to be around 20% in single entry, let's just say this number somewhere in that range. It's that's where I think there is some steam and some moonwalk to Breece Hall and Merritt because of their price difference being so close. I think more people end up on Javonte just because if they can't get to Lamb, they don't want to risk Pickens. Ferguson's not really a priority. We do have other tight ends, which we'll get there in just one second, where I think that's where at least people say, okay, but I kind of want to still get a piece of that Dallas game. And then the way I see the boost or the bump to Bill would be if we get it later on based on late swap, where people's overstacks of that game, which we'll talk about in the second segment, don't quite get there.
That's definitely possible. The reason why I haven't projected as high as I do is because I expect Dak Prescott to come in more popular than the rest of the industry thinks. I've got him at 15%. And if you're using the Dak side, it is such like a clear and obvious decision to say, okay, how does Dak beat Jaden Daniels if this game shoots out? I need touchdowns to come on the ground for Washington and through the air for Dallas. So Krosky Merritt becomes a very easy decision for people. So that's why I have him as high as I do.
And also very important to remember that if like Moore becomes a play at 3K, it really boosts the Dak side as well as that. And it also affects then Mahomes. It affects the other guys in behind that, where it's like people will just take their Rashee Rice and say, I'll just leave him as a way too underpriced value versus that. By the way, his stuff is interesting as well. We're going there. So let's segue to that now. One last thing I'll say at running back is like Barkley, Jacobs, Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, all good plays, I think, and people are talking about them, but they're not going to be able to click them enough or be able to get them enough unless they manually adjust. But those are all good options. Just 4 that I'm naming off the top of my head that I can tell you, just you can't get to them. It's just you won't get to them very often unless you make it happen personally.
Yeah, and Devon Achane, $8,100 on the other side of the Judkins stuff, right? So like imagine a game script where it's not even necessarily that like the Miami defense is shutting down Judkins. It's more, what if the Miami offense is just having those really slow first down after first down after first down drives, and Achane finishes this game with like 9 receptions for 90 yards and a touchdown and adds 60 yards and a touchdown on the ground. I certainly don't expect him to have the 130-yard, 8-yard per carry, 2 rushing touchdown game against Cleveland that he just had, but he's got so many passes, and one of those passes that they just have like a well-orchestrated short passing game to beat the Cleveland pass rush all game, which probably not going to be affected by winds, even if it gets up there to like 40 miles an hour and rainy. So there is that path to an Achane smash that also holds Judkins in check. And like you said, he's in no man's land at the pricing, $8,100. If people can spend $8,100, they're probably spending it on Jacobs or the Saquon ceiling game. Or they're just going to find the extra $700 to get to Jonathan Taylor. So I've got Achane under 10%, and I feel pretty strongly about that in single entries. And man, it's that intriguing.
I like that one too. And again, they're not that you need these two together, but I'm saying if you ended up landing on something like Achane and Fannin or Achane and Judy or something like that, it's just not going to be, when you talk about, when we get to it later, of like combinations, you're not going to see that very often, and people are avoiding the spot or trying to pick one because of the weather. Also, I think Cleveland D, when we get there, could pick up some steam because people are going Judkins. That it looked like it'd be lower owned to start the week, but I think that's going to be a little bit more popular. And you said it before, it goes directly actually with the prop factors that you mentioned. Their median project, like it's all priced in. That's why the projection is only like 1 point more for Achane. And then people are like, well, that's horrible. Why would I do that when I can get the same score from the guy on the other side of the game for way less? Wait, there's more. The game script flips, and all of a sudden it's Achane doing the work. And we had this last year. Anyone who hears my rants all the time, it was a Kamara versus Tyrone Tracy Jr. game. Tyrone Tracy Jr., way less money, more matchup was good, but so was the other side. Everyone played that, and it was a huge Kamara game, and it was like that was the breakdown where it was like, oh, what if it just flips? That's what it does. And it actually, in this case, gets you less money, but there's an argument to be had that we don't need the money depending on how we're stacking in that. So I think that's important to remember as well. Our man Go Collect says Bill is $100 more than Judkins. So I would think with those priced next to one another, Breece Hall will definitely moonwalk, possibly. But like I said, there's also people, I agree actually, but there's actually the thing that you have to remember is the morning game versus the afternoon game. And I think it's being mentioned some now, but too, like obviously there's stuff going on with the Jets game that could make it interesting as well, especially with this ownership being right there. And maybe there'll be more on that later on. We'll see. And then said Taylor, this seems to happen every week. And then he had a bad week last week, yet his price is still $8,800. I think this is actually pretty interesting too when we get to it later as well. So again, haven't even talked about some of these spots here yet, but let's keep it rolling. Let's go to the wide receiver position. You talked about Rice potentially getting up. I think you nailed it. Like even with a higher dollar, smaller field, I think people are still thinking like 40 to 50. it's like he could definitely even cross that. People are just plugging him and moving on. So talk about him first, and then talk about the other stuff going on. And this, guys, remember, this all leads to the common build here in a bit, but we're putting it all together first.
Yeah, so the Lamb conversation is especially interesting because I think it directly relates to what he just kind of mentioned, that the Jonathan Taylor possibility of reverse steaming, moonwalking, whatever you want to call it, where Lamb could absolutely explode in ownership if Debo is out, because it suddenly makes Lamb incredibly easy to fit within that game stack, and you can then pay up for a running back. But what we'd also see a lot more of is people going from the Washington side to the Dallas side, playing Dak doubles with Lamb and Pickens. So Pickens would steam, and then you can't really fit in Jonathan Taylor. So one thing that I always try to do is build in almost protection from steam into my lineup. And I think one way you can do that this week is having Pickens and Jonathan Taylor. If you have a way of fitting them both, they're going to seesaw in ownership. So either you're getting Pickens at sub 10% and Taylor at 20 plus, or you're getting Pickens at 15 to 20, but now Taylor has also come down to 15 or below. So I think that's something to keep in mind there. But yeah, I very much expect CeeDee Lamb to separate in ownership here. And I think that there is a chance that he gets to 40 to 50, something like that, if he becomes easy to fit. But that's kind of about, who do people have to pay down for, especially at the wide receiver position. And at the moment, there isn't anyone super popular. There isn't anyone that a lot of people are going to like. I have one that I love down there, and we'll get to, but he's certainly not going to be a popular one. But if Debo were to be out, and we had Chris Moore, and we had McCaffrey, maybe even Jalen Lane, I think then we'd absolutely see Lamb all the way up at like 50%.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be something to be said when we get to the combinations as well, of like, it's not just Lamb with one of those quarterbacks, which is the most obvious, but it's like also like that Rice makes that work. So it's like Judkins, Lamb, Rice lineups with one of Jaden or Dak. Like, we're already starting to form the common build here. Like, it's very easy to get to that. And like we said, it actually only gets easier if that information comes out for Washington. And we'll talk about the other side of it too. Is there anything like, so Pickens is going to be a conversation that may come up even further later, but like you said, 15, I could see like even sub 12, sub 10. And I know I'm being nitpicky, but I'm just saying in general, like, I don't think people want to get there. And even if they do, it's, I think, more common that we'd see it with the double than it would be. And it would be because of someone like Moore, like it would be like Dak, Lamb, Pickens with Moore or McCaffrey or Ertz or something like that to make it work. So even when Pickens is on lineups, it's going to be so commonly put into those big boy builds, as opposed to like the opposite effect of your Judkins props. Like, what if Pickens just has, 6 for 110 and 1 touchdown? It doesn't necessarily mean that game went off. It doesn't necessarily mean Dak was required. Like, it could just be a nice Pickens game, and it would really hurt CeeDee Lamb. So give me your thoughts on that real quick, and then anybody else at wide receiver you want to hit on before we move to tight end.
Yeah, I'm struggling to figure out exactly how I think people are going to use Pickens. For context, I have him currently projected at 12% in single entries. That is with Deebo Samuel expected in. And that is also with me projecting more ownership for Dak than the rest of the industry is. So that's, to your point, like, as long as Deebo plays, there kind of is a ceiling for Pickens ownership because he is only $200 less than CeeDee Lamb. What I'm not sure of is, are people going to use Pickens as a pivot off of Lamb and saying that's going to be my differentiator within this game? I mean, I hope that Lamb catches, 6 balls for 90 yards, but Pickens has 6 for 120 and a touchdown and do it that way. Are people going to use him as a one-off in their Mahomes stack and say, now I'm fading all of the Dallas and Washington chalk, but I still have a piece that can do well and just kind of ruin the game for everybody else? I don't really know. Or of course, are they going to use Pickens in the double stacks with CeeDee Lamb? I definitely think that he's going to be, I definitely think the most popular double stack within Dak lineups will be Lamb and Pickens, even over Lamb and Ferguson, because I think Ferguson's now at a price point where people are going to be really uncomfortable using him with CeeDee Lamb back. Like, going back to last year, I mean, Ferguson was basically not effective much when Lamb has been in the lineup. So the fact that he's now at an elevated price and Pickens is in town and Lamb is back, I just don't see that happening. So I think it would be Lamb and Pickens most often with Prescott. But there are ways to build contrarian lineups, even if you go that route. And it's not like it's going to be used a ton because, again, Pickens is only at 12% single entries here and has that pretty real cap in his ownership because of the pricing.
Yeah, we're getting to the common build, which is the starter segment too. And I know in that we won't just talk the combinations. We will talk more of the game stacks, overstat, things that you can do differently this week. And that would be like an example you just mentioned there as ways to change it up. We had a talk yesterday just quickly on that one of like, if you went Dak, let's say we get the Debo news is out, you could have like Dak, Lamb, Pickens, no Ferguson, and then use like Luke McCaffrey, who's over most people that are doing that are putting more in there. You could put Luke McCaffrey and hope that, yes, he only gets out there. Maybe some argue he should be out there more, but when he is out there, it's like he's usually speeding up the game or catching a big one. And I made fun of like the Westbrook-Akine thing. It's like, everyone, oh, there's no way Luke McCaffrey. I mean, we just can't get rid of McCaffrey's, man. LMC is becoming a thing this season, at least early on. We'll see how it goes. I don't think the same as a CMC situation, obviously, but just noting it from the Westbrook-Akine thing, if NWI was a thing, LMC is certainly turning into the same thing this season. So saying that, though, the last thing we'll round out on, we'll hit defense quickly, but tight end, I think tight end is shaping the slate and the common build pretty much to everything you just said. Is like, that's why a Ferguson isn't popping up. That's why you're not seeing a Hunter Henry as much this week, a Travis Kelce as much this week, because you got like all these guys are capable, and we'll get to some of that stuff after, but just in general, it looks to me like Warren, McBride, Meyer is kind of where people are landing. And then, of course, Fannin got into the mix with the Njoku news. Is that what you're seeing? What are you seeing and anything else there?
Yeah, so I've got, let me see here. It's more spread out this week. I will definitely say that off the top. I've got Ertz leading the way at 17.6%. Then a bit of a tier break before we get to McBride, Warren, and Mason Taylor all around 12%. And then Fannin and Meyer kind of hanging around 10, then Ferguson at 7.5, Tucker Kraft, Kelce around 6, and then everybody else below 4%. So I do expect Ertz to separate there, and I think he would go to like 30% if Debo were out. He might even go to like 40% if Debo were out. So that, by the way, is another reason why I think Ferguson's going to be held in check, because Ertz is the clear option from this game, and people don't want to double tight end, especially with Jake Ferguson.
Let me ask you this real quick, because this is all part of tying into the leverage factor and just the thought process of people actually building their single entry lineups. And I think this is extremely interesting. So just a couple of weeks ago, we had, it was Darnold, JSN, and Cup lineups with Cade Otton as the run back. And it was like, man, like, is Cade Otton the guy that's going to unlock the ceiling of that spot? And listen, I get it. This really goes to like your prop stuff earlier, like the floor versus ceiling stuff. Is Zach Ertz obviously could catch 2 touchdowns. Like it is possible for sure. And you could have Jaden Daniels with Zach Ertz and Pickens and have a completely different build than everybody else. And just say, look, I'm running a 3-man with Daniels. I'm hoping he rushes one in. I'm hoping he throws a bunch of yards to these other people, but they're not needed. I'm using Ertz for the touchdowns, and I'm going Pickens on the other side, or as a way to get different with whatever you want to do. Javonte. And make it really different, but still be in the same game. I think that's part of people's late swap stuff as well. But do you think Zach Ertz is more of like a safety blanket, not just for the quarterback himself, but like that type of play? And there's a bunch of these tight ends that just could crush him and hit a ceiling score at a onesie position where you kind of want the best score there that you can get? Or do you think it makes sense to go like Dak, Lamb, Pickens, Ertz, and then use that spot for something else and not play? Again, I'm going the if this, then that scenario of like Debo being out, for example.
Yeah, so I think there are 2 different directions you can look at it. The way you phrased it initially was like, is Ertz the guy who's going to unlock the ceiling for Dak stacks? No. But the other way around, I think it does work. If Dak and Lamb and Pickens are aggressive through the air and they're finding success and they're building a lead and Washington has to play catch up and that pass rate increases, Ertz is going to get peppered. Right, like we saw Ertz catch how many balls in the playoffs last year? I think he caught like 11 that game against Philly. So yeah, 11 for 104 on 16 targets. So like if you get that kind of game script where they are behind and they have to drop back every single time, they have to abandon the run, Ertz has a really good ceiling. He just caught 6 for 64 and a touchdown. He caught 6 for 43 and a touchdown already this season. So I think he's kind of exactly as you framed him. Like, he's not someone who's going to have this massive ceiling. He's not going to have the explosive plays that really unlock things for Dallas. It's more the other way around, where Dallas could unlock the game script that he needs to access his ceiling. And also, like, he'd have a really good floor in that kind of script. So I have no issue playing Ertz, but you got to know that that's not your separator by any means.
Yeah, feels like that. I mean, a lot of people are mentioning it. Our guy, MN Holla, says, if Debo is out, can this game just fail due to pace? Example, or e.g. Daniels and Bill slow the game down. You think that's a possibility as well? We've seen this plenty of times where someone's like, oh, receiver's out. We got all the value in the world now. Let's overstack it. But in reality, it then changes things. And it is just a lot of short passes and runs and things like that amongst them and what they're doing. Obviously, the short passes could benefit Ertz, back to that previous conversation. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's possible. I would also say, like, one of the other possibilities here is we're thinking of, hey, Dallas has been this really good offense. And they've been an outstanding offense. And now they're getting CeeDee Lamb back. It's automatic they're going to come in here and they're going to throw all over the place and they're going to be hyper efficient. They had all their guys in week 1, right? And Dak was held to what? 188 passing yards against Philly, 5.5 yards per attempt. It's not automatic. He had 251 and a touchdown with 2 picks against Chicago's bad defense. Nothing in this league is automatic. Nothing in this league is guaranteed, especially if Washington has the ball a lot in this game. Or maybe it's like that the game does have points and it does reach the 54.5 total. But especially on the Dallas side, things are so spread out between Javonte and Pickens and Lamb and Ferguson that none of these guys have games that we need. None of these guys even have games that are quite good. They're all just fine. And then it's really easy to fade the game that way. So they're absolutely past to this game failing. I think the question is, if you're fading it, do you have something else that you like that really has a chance to separate? Or do you feel like you have a better chance of separating some way within the stack through George Pickens or something like that? So I don't even have this fully answered yet. I don't even know what my leverage lane is going to be today, but I think that's the way we want to think through this game.
Yeah, I agree. Real quick on this one, just a note. This is, I know we always break down from the DraftKings perspective, but just for Uzi here, FanDuel added Rashee Rice late. He is $7,500 over there. First of all, he's not a lock, as we just talked about, even on DraftKings. For cash games, yes, he's a lock. People are just going to plug him in, and you move on. He will be very high owned, but you can definitely leverage him, hence the name of the show, or you can play differently or build differently. And I think that's the last thing, and we'll hit on defense. And then it already covered a bunch as we jump into the segment too, and we have the common build already. But it kind of works out, Alex, that it fits to Broncos or like the Patriots or something like that for the expensive defenses. And then you can go to like Carolina Panthers. I know people are landing there down low. I think one of the interesting things is you're not really seeing Chiefs be popular up top, even though that would be a way that game could go. And to our guy, Tyler, MN Holla, who just mentioned the stuff previously, we don't see Dallas or Washington picking up steam either. Yet like if Washington's without everything, the Dallas D would be a great way to leverage on this slate. If you're just not landing anywhere else and you're fine with it, or you put like Javonte Williams with the Dallas D, and it's like, even if Javonte does get some steam, it's doubt people are playing him with his defense. And if you think that just shuts down the Washington side and Dallas can get after them, it's not so many people run to like, oh, but they don't have this guy anymore. They're a different defense this year. They're way where, yeah, I literally don't care about last year, and I don't even care about this year. I care about Sunday, October 19th, the single slate for week 7. And that's it. That's all I care about. That's all you should care about. So it's all about setting it up and playing the game, and not so much focused on the plays and what you think, because we all don't know anything, but we do know how to play DFS. That's the key. And that's what we're trying to learn about and talk about here. So common build, do you want to sort of put it all together, at least what you're seeing from all that? And then we can go to part 2.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say here is, if you start with Daniels, Debo, CeeDee Lamb, and Zach Ertz, I think that's probably the most common double stack with the bring back from this game. We're going to see more double stacks with a bring back from this game than any other on the slate. That leaves $14,000 for your 3 remaining spots, including a defense. So that's really easy to fit. But it's also not that much more expensive to save $400 on quarterback going to Dak Prescott, and then go up from $6,200 Debo to $7,300 Pickens. That still leaves $13,300 for your 3 remaining spots. I think what we'd see then is plenty are going to leave Ertz in there. So now it's a double with one bring back on the Dallas side. I think we would see a lot of Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in that lineup, which still leaves 7,200 for the final two spots. Maybe they then take Zach Ertz out, in which case they could still opt for a really cheap tight end. Maybe they try to go a little bit more expensive, especially if they feel good about like a min-price Chris Moore. So we'll see what that looks like. But this is not difficult to fit, and I think that's the thing I mentioned. Oh, by the way, I've already plugged in Rashee Rice and Quinshon Judkins into these lineups, which is why I'm talking about the final two. So these are really, really easy to fit, and you only need to kind of have one guy in the lineup that you feel is a risk. So in this case, like it would probably be a $4,000 flex, something like that. So you still can use some money on the defense. Maybe it's if you have the $3,000 Browns defense paired up with Quinshon Judkins in the wind and rain, which I think is going to be a really popular thing. In fact, I definitely need to boost the projected ownership on the Cleveland defense. That would leave you 4,200 for this final flex. You'd see some double tight end. You'd see some people go even cheaper than that, and then they would upgrade Zach Ertz. So I think the thing that I want to hammer home here is like, we can't be in the mindset of, oh, I'm just going to flip to Dak and Pickens, and that's going to make me different enough. This is easy to do, and I think a lot of people are going to do it. So we'd have to find something else. Maybe it's you add in a third Dallas guy. You add Kevontae Turpin as that like cheap separator or something like that. So I think the common build is Dallas, Washington with Judkins, with Rashee Rice. I think you need to find a way to differ from that in some way. You either need to leverage Judkins, leverage Rice. Maybe you leverage both of those guys and you find something like where you're paying way up for Jonathan Taylor and paying down twice, something like that. But if you are just playing Judkins, Rice, Dallas, Washington, you have very, very limited opportunity to find a separator because you're already doing what the field is doing.
Yeah, I was going to say that. You nailed it. And so this will get to sort of how do we do this and how do we leverage it. But like the Judkins Rice is the ultimate combo. I mean, it just is. It's like you said, it could be 60-40 or 60-50 for something like 50-50 called percent each that you see in a single entry. And if you look at the overall, it's like Judkins, I feel very confident in this. Judkins, Rice, Lamb, and one of Jaden Daniels or Dak. Yeah. So what does that say in your single entry? That even though I'm on team hashtag never Mahomes and I don't care, but that's fine. I'm just saying that would be a factor where he just can't be the same ownership everybody's saying because those other two quarterbacks are getting boosted and they get boosted even more. I keep saying the pun there because it's funny because of more, but they get boosted up if Deebo Samuel's out even further. So just of note, like that's what we know going in. The defense, we've got the flip-flop of the two expensive with the 1 to 2 at the bottom. It's at the bottom. It's basically the Panthers, Bears, Browns. Like it's some Bears and Browns very similar. People feel good about pairing up like Judkins and the Browns, or if they're landing on Carolina because they're not playing on Breece Hall or something like that. Like all that makes sense, and I get it. And it is ways to kind of semi-leverage, but you're not really like leveraging a Breece Hall who might moonwalk by playing the chalkiest cheap defense in a Carolina DST. Like that doesn't really. It can be said afterwards as a content piece, but it's not really doing that because you're kind of like going into the same storm, just different sides. You're coming in from the east, they're coming in from the west. They all end up in the same storm at the end. The tornado picks them all up. So it is possible that happens in that analogy. But just to note, let's talk about, now that we have the common build and we know what that is, there is some late swap factors to it of those guys in the afternoon, but there's also a ton of really good spots on this slate that you can go. And I think you mentioned it off the top of the show, and I know some people didn't fully sort of understand it or go that route with me yesterday when I was talking about this. I'm definitely not saying to not correlate at all. Like that's certainly the key. I was saying I think it actually gets better as the pricing gets tighter, which is typically as the season goes on. What happens is in the early weeks when the pricing is so soft, it's just like why we typically say an overstack of a game. Oftentimes, unless it's the only game that goes off on a slate, it can oftentimes be better in single entry where you can make a mistake or two. And by mistake, I mean a 14-pointer and a 12-pointer, where in the large field stuff, someone found the 20 and the 19-pointer and still crushed you. But I was saying in like weeks 1 through 6, because the pricing is so soft, and there's still some soft prices out there this week, but because it's so soft, you really can't make as many mistakes, and the correlation doesn't always work as favorable. Even though I'm still saying to correlate, it works more when the pricing goes up because you can still have 3 to 4 really good bets in your lineup. And then it's like, if my stack, which is very contrarian and a full-on separator, just comes through, I can kind of plug in whatever I want around it via secondary stacks and things like that and make it all make sense. Do you have anything else to add on that? And then
I think the way to explain what you're kind of saying mathematically is that when pricing is loose, well, actually, let me start with tight pricing. The reason why we correlate is to give ourselves a better chance of being right about every single spot in our lineup. The chance that you're right about every single spot in your lineup increases fairly dramatically when pricing is loose. And it's easy to fit like all of the best plays and just say, I like this guy, I like that guy, I like that guy. Oh, look, I can fit them all. It's a lot harder to be right about every spot of your lineup when you say, oh, I like this guy, I like this guy, I like this guy, but now I don't know what to do because I can't fit any of the good players. Okay, let me correlate those spots instead. So that, I think, is why once we get to this part of the season where pricing is tighter, it's not that we ever didn't want to correlate. It's that the advantage to correlating now is even stronger than it was then. We're more likely to really separate from the uncorrelated lineups when our correlation pays off at this time of year.
Yes, nailed it. And thank you for that. And also, just to add on, it's also that because the pricing gets tighter, people have a harder time figuring it out and what that stack's going to be. And they also have, usually, just of note, I don't want to put this the wrong way, but it's, again, you join what we're doing. We've got FTN, we've got SHIPIT Nation. You can go use code SHIP19. Like, it's not just to tell you to join. I'm saying, but what happens is if people are losing the first 6 weeks, like me, by the way, so it happens to all of us. I'm losing right now. Alex up after week 1 alone and covers off his whole year and beyond. But the point is, if you're losing, what a lot of people do is they change gears. You and I had a really good conversation on mindset over at DFS Mastermind yesterday, and what people end up doing in week 7, 8, 9, as it gets harder, they go safer. And that's a huge issue because your whole strategy, like mine, and that's why it typically ends up paying off usually for me, is because I'm not changing it. I know it can work. I actually think last week was a revelation on how I might be able to find and unlock some stuff sooner in the season because I am still comfortable with the contrarian stacks. I just don't need to overstack as much or limit my possibilities. That's my review work. That's what I'm seeing when I go back and look at everything that I do. Right now, though, what ends up happening is as it gets tighter and someone said, well, that stack seems insane. It's like, maybe it is, but it's like I have everything else seems amazing, and that stack has a reason behind it. So to insane actually converts to low owned and big time separator. And now it's like when people see it on the review show on Monday, the Takedown Breakdown here on the SHIPIT Nation YouTube station, they say, wow, it seems like that lineup was so easy. They just got that random stack right. Yes, they got all the good bets and then played a stack that ended up hitting. So I think it's definitely a good opportunity just to think about it from that perspective, Alex. But let's talk about some of these other places we can go in single entry that might not be too crazy. And we got to go with the bit for a second. I mean, you were dead right on Mahomes that week. He literally ended up being on the Millie Maker, which is a whole nother conversation because people might not get this one either too, or like follow it as much, but the optimal often has a naked quarterback. So it's not that you can't build for that. It's like the math that Alex just gave on everything else, but it's kind of like your math on the 2 tight end stuff on last week's show, which these shows are almost turning into evergreen episodes now because you can get these information pieces. But it was like, it's not that they're not hitting or couldn't have hit. It's nobody's playing them. And so obviously we know like optimizers are literally set up to almost stack automatically, or the simulations make that the right way to go. They do hit in the optimal, but like the same week Mahomes hit, it could have been a Stafford. So all I was trying to say is it's not like he's needed. And that was kind of the piece there, but that could be something to be said for Rashee Rice this week. I'll kick it to you, but talk to us about Mahomes and then other sort of game stacks and things like you could see us going to here for single entry.
Yeah. So one of our focuses has been like explaining why the chalk is the chalk. And in this case, I don't think the Mahomes ownership is so much about Mahomes. It's more about like, oh, I'm going to play Rashee Rice. He's an easy one to just pair with Mahomes. And now because Mahomes is difficult to predict, like if he brings Rice along with him, who else is he bringing? Worthy? Well, I don't know. Hollywood Brown had 2 touchdowns last week, and Travis Kelce's been really involved. But also Tyquan Thornton might be on the field getting the bomb, and Juju Smith-Schuster, they really like his blocking, so there's a good chance he's still getting a number of slot snaps, things like that. So they're just saying, okay, I'll just play Mahomes with Rashee Rice, and that's going to be easy. I think most of the Mahomes lineups are going to be poorly correlated, so I'm almost like not even – I don't care that much to leverage the Mahomes lineups because I don't think those lineups are going to be very strong. I think it's going to be harder to beat the Dak lineups. It's going to be harder to beat the Jaden Daniels lineups than the Mahomes lineups. I don't view Mahomes lineups very differently than I just view like the Rashee Rice singles because I don't think they're going to be that correlated. If I were to play Mahomes, I would, by the way, stack the heck out of it. I'd use Trey Tucker as a bring back or Ashton Genty, and I would use Kelce and Rice minimum. Maybe I'd also throw in Worthy. Maybe I'd also throw in Tyquan and just take a chance that he gets one deep ball. Also realize there's a chance he plays like 3 to 5 snaps and that's it. So I would go for the correlation with Mahomes, even though it's obviously easier to not. I think it's the only way to do it well. But none of the Mahomes stuff that I checked simmed even remotely well. So like I said, I'm not too concerned with like figuring out how to leverage that. But I do think he's going to be used. I don't have him projected for as much ownership as I have Dak. Let me remind myself. Yeah, I've got him at 13.6% single entries. Reminder, Dak was at 15.1. So it's like it's going to happen. People are going to use it, but I'm not anywhere near as focused on, okay, how do I handle the Kansas City stuff as I am? How do I handle Dallas? Because I think we have to get Dallas, Washington right to win this slate, whether that means being right about the fade and just using Krusky Merritt or just using Javonte Williams or fully embracing the game and stacking it in a better way than other people. I think we have to be right about the Dallas game. I don't think we have to be right about the Kansas City game. I think more likely than not, that's just not a tipping point to the slate.
So 2 things on it quick, because I'm not playing it. So if this wins and people can just have it, it's not going to be certainly not going to be my leverage lane ever. I don't really care. It's a lane I literally never go in, so I don't care. And it's been very profitable to not go in this lane. But I think if you play it, it's very simple. And you're not even really leveraging Mahomes. It's the fact that if he does moonwalk backwards from what people already think, because there's enough people that listen to people like me say never Mahomes, or they just say, like, at the end of the day, that Washington-Dallas game is too good to be true. We're getting even more value in it. I just got to land there, or I can't risk the morning. I got to wait for the afternoon. I can make moves because I got Jordan Love. I got all this other stuff, which we'll get to. The answer is quite simple. It is Rice is popular. Meyer is popular. It was in a bunch of lineups like Mayo, myself, and Squirrel did yesterday. It's just a natural first common secondary stack that, to Alex's point always, and I try and back it up, he's the math guy here, but I'll just say it, like, what does it really correlate between those two? Their price is good. Like, it's a nice combo pack, sure, but is it really not baked in? It is. It's baked in. So the easy swap is Kelce at tight end, opposite of Mayer, and it's playing Jacoby Myers. Myers instead of Mayer. He's $100 less than Rashee Rice. You can go Mahomes, Kelce. You have to play a onesie position anyway. Myers. That's how you play it. And that could win someone all the money this week. And I'm not like covering my bases. I'm never playing it. I told you this, but I don't see it as a whole. I'm just saying it seems clear on how you could add Rice into it too if you want as a different way to do it, even with Rice. But I would be doing what Alex said. If you were playing it, I'd be overstacking it and not just looking for what everybody else is doing, especially in single entry. We're like, well, as long as I have Mahomes and Rice, I know Rice is undervalued, so I'll get that, and I'll take all the extra Mahomes stuff. And by the way, the guy's not going to run for 30 to 60 on the ground and a touchdown every week. And I guarantee you, we've seen plenty of these Raiders games, divisional opponent, where they try and take his head off on those runs. So he might just see a bit of a different scenario here this week. And then lastly, I would say the other thing, I think that the way I'll love this week is the Chiefs defense. I think they've been great. And I think it's very interesting that there's 2 expensive defenses just below them that are super popular. And I'm fine with just going to the Chiefs defense and hoping that starts up some stuff for them as well.
You just gave me an idea. I might need to hit an under on Mahomes rushing yards, because I think there's a very clear pattern of he runs when they need him to run, and that's based on opponent, and it's based on who do they actually have running routes, and are they getting open? Can he find someone to throw to? I think neither of those boxes are checked in this one. I don't expect him to scramble a lot. I think he's going to be able to throw the ball wherever he wants, and I think they're going to be up big. And we've seen for years, like, typically Mahomes prefers to save the scrambling until the postseason. He hasn't this year because they really needed him to scramble early on. He had 57 and 66 rush yards in the first 2 games, but then 5 for 2, 4 for 5 against the Giants and in the convincing win against the Ravens. And then he ran again against Jacksonville in a loss, and he ran again 10 for 32 against Detroit. A massive game. Now, like, they're back in a situation where, okay, schedule-wise, division-wise, they're in a good place. This should be an easy game. And they're now at full strength weapons-wise. So the under 22.5 rushing yards, I think, is probably really strong for Mahomes this week.
Yeah, I like that call, and that's a freebie from Alex. I know you got that stuff all covered in your Discord and everything that you do. So we'll talk more and you'll be able to showcase that here at the end. But just of note, what are some of the other spots for you then? If we talk about, is there any other combinations? And then is there anything else when it comes to game stacks with now how we can play it with what we know? That's sort of the segment we always talk about with that. Is there other stuff we can run with here?
There are 2 games, really cheap stack opportunities that really drew my attention and interest kind of early in the week. I faded on them a little bit. One was Denver, one was New Orleans. In both cases, I like the fact that they're cheap stacks with quarterbacks who are very willing to throw the ball downfield. But they're not simming well in large part because the pay-up options are not good, particularly at wide receiver. I think the number one thing we want to avoid this week is if we're not stacking the Washington-Dallas game in some way, if we're not using Daniels or Dak, the last thing we want to do is use receivers from that game. We can mini stack it by playing like Krosky Merritt and Javonte Williams or something like that. But predominantly, if we're playing that game, then we want to play it in such a way that explains why the passing games will underwhelm. So doing something like a Bo Nix stack with CeeDee Lamb and Deebo Samuel, I think is like the stone worst way to play this slate. So if you're not paying up at wide receiver, like those are the best pay up options. You could go to Justin Jefferson. I think he's fine. And also I think there are potential game stacks for Philly, Minnesota that are worth looking into that I haven't totally looked into as much as I probably should just yet. But the other game that I am interested in is the Chargers and the Colts. I went to a Charger stack last week. I think it was a mistake. One of the reasons I thought it was a mistake was because I played into the Keenan Allen ownership when I knew that he was going to be chalk and nobody else did. But the second reason I think it was a mistake was because I did like one of the cardinal sins of DFS that I've talked about for years now, which is a quarterback becomes more popular when his chance of breaking the slate decreases because he loses a key receiver of his. That's what happened with Herbert last week. Herbert was going to be contrarian because people didn't like having to choose between Ladd, Keenan, and Quentin Johnston. All of a sudden, it was an easy choice of how to double Herbert, and people flocked to Herbert. But Herbert's chances of breaking the slate went down. Now he's back in a good spot. He's in a matchup where he probably needs to throw the ball a lot. Indianapolis has been thrown on. Jacoby Brissett, of all guys, just had a really good game through the air against them. So I think Herbert has a very good chance of breaking this slate. I like Jonathan Taylor as a bringback. I love Michael Pittman as a bringback. You could also go to Tyler Warren. So I really like this game, and I think that ownership is going to be in check because it's hard to figure out how to stack him. So a couple ideas here. Number one is you can just pick 2 and hope you're right. You could also play 3 entry this week and do 3 Herbert stacks. One is McConkey and Keenan. One is McConkey and QJ. One is QJ and Keenan. And you're bound to be right in one of the 3 if the Herbert stack really does go off. So that is something I'm really toying with as well.
Interesting you brought that up because that's something I know a lot of people aren't comfortable with, and it gets asked a ton, right? In the SHIPIT Nation Discord, I'm sure you're asked a ton over at Masterminds. Like all the people talk about is like different ways and how would you handle that? I think we even had it like, if I go all the way back to the top, T Trizzle said, after you run your optimizer, what determines what lineups you're going to enter for 3 max and single lineup contests? And then if you're asking about this, so T Trizzle, I don't know if you're over at the Mastermind or not, but we literally just covered this. The Nades and I video goes through this as well. And then there's a ton of stuff on single entry and 3 max. But to answer the question to what you just said is sometimes your single entry is super comfortable. And sometimes it's like, man, I could run just 2 quick variations off this and it wouldn't kill me. And you almost treat your 3 max like a single entry and you just run those variations. So it's like, they'll all be, if they all cash, it's all min cashes. If they all do well, they're all up at the top. If they all miss, you were treating it like a single entry that misses anyway. So again, I don't think many people think about that, and it shows all about different ways to play. even with contest selection, I think there's ways you can go about it when you're doing that.
Yeah, essentially what you want to do is when you're selecting your three lineups for 3 entry, you want to make sure that those lineups are playing off of one another in some way. And so one option that you can do is you can try to make them like really diverse, and where if one fails, the other is more likely to succeed. And if that one fails, the other is more likely to succeed. In PGA, I've done this a lot where like one of my lineups is, this is my favorite lineup. My second lineup is a full AM PM stack. And then the last lineup is a full PM AM stack. So I'm getting nice inverse correlation between them, but I also am still just playing the guys that I really like. But the other thing that you can do is do what I kind of just mentioned with the Chargers. It's like you're really treating it as one lineup, but you're making the hardest decision cover all your bases. So I don't know how to choose between Ladd, QJ, and Keenan, so I'm going to cover all of my bases there. And because they're all like very similar in price, the rest of the lineup is probably going to look really similar. I can diversify the rest of the lineup just for the sake of diversification if I'd like. Or I can say, no, this is the strongest lineup. I'm going to treat this as a single entry and just have 3 versions of the single entry where it doesn't matter to me which one hits and which one doesn't.
Yeah. And I think there's going to be more, to come with the slate as we see it play out again. We'll have to wait on more of the news as well. Is there anything else actually, though, in the afternoon that you wanted to talk about as it pertains to the late swap stuff with like the Cowboys Commanders? Like we talked about the Herbert stuff. What about the Packers Cardinals game? Somebody said it here, and I think you already hit on this, and it's a bit of a spoiler alert, but that's okay. But I think Brissett last week was a bigger product of what we saw with the Colts probably than we are for Brissett. Now this week, I know some people are still setting that up. If you got a late swap and things like that, maybe it could make sense. But the Packers side is tricky to get right. But with the Jacobs mentioned earlier, Tucker Kraft disappointed a ton of people last week. Golden off the bye did show up and get some action, and Dobbs is there, and we're waiting on Wick's news. What's your most likely spot to swap to if you have stuff bust up in the morning that doesn't go your way and now you're on Washington, Dallas? Or are you most likely just to flip around how you handle your Washington, Dallas?
Yeah, this is a hard one to kind of talk through, because ideally what we have when we're talking about late swap is clear differentiating, like opportunities for separation early, and then a clear pivot late. We very much have the clear pivots late. We've got the Indy LAC game, we've got Green Bay, Arizona, we've got Washington, Dallas, and also the Giants game. The problem is I also want these games for a lot of my separators. Like one of my separators is in the Denver game. We're gonna talk about him soon. So I don't know that I'm going to have enough information by the time we get to these late games to make informed late swap decisions. If I were to try that, you need differentiation early. So one of the ways to do that is play HN instead of Quinshon Judkins. If you play HN and he goes off and Quinshon Judkins fails, you have a massive green light to play Washington, Dallas, however you'd like. You also are going to know the Rashee Rice stuff early on. I think if you're setting up late swap, the number one thing to keep in mind is you can't just play Judkins and Rashee Rice and nothing else, contrarian early on, because you're not going to have nearly enough information by the time you get to those late games to make your decision. So you've got to find a separator earlier, and that separator should be someone you play, but also someone that you don't play, either in Judkins or Rashee Rice. If you want to approach the slate that way, you can also just approach the slate where, I like my separators in the 4:00 games. I am going to play the chalk early, and I'm just not going to use late swap much on this given slate.
Yeah, we're going to get to our leverage lane here shortly. Couple notes, almost 200 people watching live. We appreciate you. Just make sure you hit that thumbs up when you're in here. Only 64 likes so far. So again, it helps us as we try and grow the show. Last week, over 4,000 views, over 400 likes by the time we hit the playback, but that's what pushes it in the algorithm. The more it is, that's the more I feel comfortable, like I said last week, in going into I got 2 more spots I'd like to talk about. But when you see less engagement, everybody's in the chat. If you can type, you can hit the like. That's one of my other sayings always. If you can type, just press the thumbs up. It takes 2 seconds. I love this point you made about first of all, game script independent. You didn't fully say that, but that you mentioned it earlier. But to your point, if you get that go off early for you, and that really busts up and changes up everything, you can kind of do whatever you want for sure. I love this comment. We literally had this conversation yesterday on the mastermind interview. You said, reading psychology books and like how it's sort of relate. Obviously you read them for your golf career as well. And then bringing it over to DFS. This is the key, Jenna. You brought up the unlock here. Every other show is just going to tell you the picks and the plays and all this other stuff. And it's what it's all about. In the end, you need the right picks and the right plays, but they're a product of the process. And that's the whole point. When you have a proven process or something that people have used to work to their advantage, that's why everybody here is trying to learn and get better. I don't know if you have anything you want to add on that, Alex, but I think it's key for sure.
No, you pretty much said it. I mean, we talked a lot yesterday on the mastermind show about just how kind of fascinated I am in psychology, but also just like what a large role psychology plays in DFS, both in terms of predicting what your opponents are going to do, but also like how we react to sweats not going our way or sweats going our way, and how we react to getting into larger contests when we win a ticket, and making sure that we still play a really sound process and not a more risk averse process because I'm at a stake that I've never been at before. So yeah, psychology is a massive part of DFS, and it's really cool that we're doing a show that's finally talking about it in the way that you and I have talked about and thought about DFS for a while. But I think a lot of people, this is new stuff too, and that's really cool.
Yeah, you guys can check it out. Like I just showed it. It ended up, talk about going forever. Me and him like to talk, both of us. That's why this show usually goes more than an hour, and it's great because it's all good stuff. Great engagement in the chat. We love talking with you guys. But it was an hour and 45. I was like, it'd only be like an hour typically. And it was pretty incredible. Those that watched it already, a lot of them said that they had a good time taking it in.
We also, by the way, talked about why my DraftKings username is Jim Blickle, and that is not me. That is my dad. So if you want that story, you can find it there.
Yeah, we also talked about how Alex doesn't make his bed in the morning. So it literally had a lot of different factors on it. Alex is a non-bed maker when it comes to the morning, but I always say it, get in at SHIPIT Nation, use code SHIP19. You can get in for $19 for 5 days. We have free education courses that you can go and take. We have tutorials across all sports on how to use things. But if you want to know how I use these things and how I play and my process and how I think and other people around the industry that I talk to, you can take a free tour and go check it out. You can go to the site and see it. It's a complete add-on, but it's an add-on for a reason. Nate said it earlier, like the Stone / Saber Sim plus the Alex interview, like all that stuff, typically worth the price of admission. So thoughts on this one, Alex? If you're pay up for probability, like you're going up to someone, like Pickens is a prime example and he has him in there. Do you think it's better to like try and leverage Rice with Worthy and get that spot right if it's even a spot? Because Worthy could get spread out on too. Or do you think it's to go to Pickens versus Lamb, and maybe that'll be something that we've got coming up more here in a bit?
So I don't do this very often, where I just like go all in on a take that I saw with my eyes. But Xavier Worthy looked really slow to me against Detroit, and I think that he's not going to be much of a factor, or at least he's not going to have the kind of ceiling game where he's going to be that impactful. So I have no issue fading Rice. I think if you're trying to fade him within the game, Travis Kelce is the guy to do it. In MME, you could even take shots on Pacheco and hope he breaks a long run or two. He actually, I think, has looked a little bit better recently, but it'd be Kelce for me, not Worthy that I'd pivot off of. But I also think it's fine to just either fade or use Rice as a one-off.
A lot of people,
Lamb.
There's other guys there too. Hollywood Brown, Juju, Pacheco, Hunt, Gray, Kelce, like that. That's the thing why people say, again, back to your median thing earlier, he's got like a over under of 5.5 catches. He could have 6 for 60 and that's it. And cash games, you're playing them. I get it. But we're talking about single entry. It's not a single entry cash game we're talking about. So there is different stuff. A lot of people are saying like you could see 40% ownership just to get 6 for 75. It's very possible he would beat his props. He would be the reason you're playing him for that, but he doesn't get the touchdowns or a touchdown at all or anything like that. So not saying he's a bad play, explaining the difference between what we know, why he is chalk, what that means, the props, and what could end up happening, and how it could end up playing out for you and where you could get different and make your lineups a little bit more unique. So love that. Shout out to RJ321 says from DraftKings, we had some battles against each other. Definitely like the show and a different thinking to get different approach. We appreciate you, man. Thank you for tuning in. And for everybody, there's always really good feedback in here on this. Darren says, I was liking the Mahomes overstack, but after hearing Alex talk about the Chargers, I think I like that more. Let's pause there for 2 seconds. We'll get there. Easier target tree, better game environment, run backs, lower ownership, definitely possible. The last spot I wanted to hit, and I'm not sure what you were saving. Like you said, you don't know your leverage lane yet, but what were you thinking on this Philly? You're a Philly guy. We got to get this out there, right? Philly, Minnesota spot, because Wentz, Jefferson, Hawkinson, whatever you want to do there. There's Hurts, there's Barkley, there's AJ Brown, there's Goddard. Like you've had some thoughts on these things. So what are you doing there? And what's your thoughts on that one?
So my initial thought was that I was probably going to stack Minnesota if Quinyon Mitchell was out. It looks like Quinyon Mitchell's going to play. It looks like Jalen Carter's going to play. Zach Bond's going to play. So the lone kind of weakness for Philly defensively is the second cornerback. It looks like it's going to be Adoree Jackson this week, kind of re-winning the job from Keely Ringo, which was more just Ringo losing the job after he got an opportunity. Consequently, the Eagles have been really bad against wide receiver twos, and they're a tough matchup across the board for everyone else. Running backs are kind of neutral, maybe slightly positive. So Jordan Addison, I think, is a fine play, but I also think Minnesota does a better job of moving guys around the formation. It's going to be harder for Quinyon to just shadow Justin Jefferson. So I think Jefferson or Addison could have a good game. I don't think it's going to be both. So I like that side a little bit, but not a ton. On the Philadelphia side of things, Minnesota plays the most too high in the league and the most zone in the league. Philly has really struggled against both, particularly zone coverage. So I am not in at all on the Philadelphia passing game this week. I think the only guy who could have a really good game is Dallas Goedert. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they have actually made some adjustments in the last week and they have a much better approach and they give Hurts more answers to zone. Because the thing is, they haven't struggled against zone because Jalen Hurts has been bad against zone. They've struggled because they're running man routes into zone coverages and there's nowhere for Hurts to throw the ball when teams zone up. Kevin Patullo, the offensive coordinator, has just been really bad in a lot of ways, and route concepts is the number one way that I think he's struggled in, along with predictability of formation, so on and so forth. I don't want to get into too much of a rant on Philly because I could talk about them for hours and hours. They are my team. But the one advantage I will say for the Philly offense this week, the ground game has really struggled, except with outside zones. They're under 3.5 yards per carry in every single run concept except for outside zones, where Saquon is at 4.4 this year. The Minnesota defense is under 4 yards per carry in every single run concept this year, except for outside zones, where they're allowing 5.9 yards per carry. So there is a very real chance that Saquon gets back on track this week. I've got Saquon in a longest rush ladder starting at over 16.5. So I like Saquon as a contrarian play. I think he's got a lot of upside, but I don't think I'm going to play into this game in a stack kind of way.
All right. So it's not your leverage lane, and we're going to get there. So anything else we missed before we get to the finale?
No.
I think I have to go first because I'm worried you're going to take mine, and I feel like you'll be better. Actually, you know what? I have a backup, so I'll let you go first. I want to make sure my guy's always taken care of. You go first. You said you weren't fully certain on it, and even if you land in my spot, I've got another one, so it's fine. What do you got? What is your leverage lane?
I'm not taking yours. There's a 0% chance you've got mine. I am leaving open the possibility to playing into the Dallas stuff. Someone asked earlier, do I like Pickens or Lamb? I think it's overwhelmingly likely that I'm either using both in a Dak lineup or I'm not using either, and I'm hoping that game fails in some way. So I'm leaving open the possibility to use the Dak double or the Herbert doubles that I really like. So my leverage lane is going to be Marvin Mims at $3,500. I think there's a very good chance that a lot of lineups this week are forced into a pay down option, whether they're using double tight end with punts down there, whether they're using Chris Moore or Luke McCaffrey. And I think a lot of these guys are fine. They've got a good chance of giving you 6, but they have very little chance of giving you 20. And Marvin Mims can give you 20. He went over 100 yards twice last year. He's got 60 a couple times, or maybe it was only once already this year. But the guy scores touchdowns, and he has big plays. The other thing is he's really predictable from a matchup sensitivity point of view. He does well when the opponent plays a lot of single high and when they play a lot of man coverage. The Giants play a ton of both. The other thing here is wide receiver twos against the Giants are averaging over 11 points more than their average so far this season. Wide receiver 2 against the Giants has been the single best fantasy matchup in all of football this year. So I think Mims is going to get an opportunity. I think he's got a great chance to make a big play or two. Even if he doesn't make the big play, the other thing I really like, he's got a rushing touchdown this year. He's involved around the goal line because they know, hey, we've got this matchup advantage. And the final thing here, the Giants love to blitz. One of the best ways that the Broncos counter the blitz is with those quick swing screen type passes to Mims, blockers out in front of him. I think we have a really good chance of finding 20 to 25 DraftKings points from a $3,500, 1% owned Marvin Mims. And that to me is really exciting because he fits any kind of pay-up build. You want to go Dak doubles with Jonathan Taylor, you can do it with Marvin Mims. You want to go Herbert doubles with the Jonathan Taylor bring back and a Devon Achane contrarian play, something like that. You can do it with Marvin Mims. So he unlocks a ton, and he unlocks basically any kind of lineup that I am still thinking about. So Marvin Mims, leverage lane.
Now, what about if people say Troy Franklin is the number 2?
They're kind of both the number 2, where Franklin's the number 2 on most plays, but if Marvin Mims is on the field, Marvin Mims is the number 2. The way we define number 2 wide receivers is kind of, it's we really try to take a football centric approach where we're not just arbitrarily assigning wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 to guys, or wide receiver 3, so on and so forth to guys. It's what are they on the field? And we define that as, how does the defense game plan for this guy? How do they defend this guy? So for example, like we call Devontae Adams the wide receiver 1, Puka the wide receiver 2 on the Rams. Why? Because Devontae Adams gets the wide receiver 1 shadow treatment from Quinyon Mitchell, from JC Horn, whoever they're playing. So when Mims is on the field, he's the wide receiver 2, both in terms of how Denver uses him and how teams cover him. Sutton is clearly the wide receiver 1. This is actually a really interesting conversation because it also applies to my love for the Chargers, by the way, but why it's so difficult to choose, because the Colts have been one of the toughest matchups, 6.4 fewer fantasy points per game to wide receiver 1s, and one of the best, plus 6.4 and plus 7.1 for wide receiver 2s and other wide receivers. So figuring out who the wide receiver 1 is for the Chargers, which is the single most difficult one to nail in the entire NFL. We think it's Ladd with QJ number 2, Keenan number 3, but you could put any of them in any of those roles, probably except for Keenan as the wide receiver 1, and have a good case for it. The last thing I'll say on that question, the Giants are also bad against wide receiver 3s, other wide receivers. So it doesn't even matter if you really think that Troy Franklin is the wide receiver 2 and Mims is the wide receiver 3. It's still a good spot for Mims. And more important to me is the fact that Mims is the guy that beats single high and man coverages. Franklin is the guy who beats zone and 2 high. So I don't think this is a Franklin spot. To me, it's more of a Sutton spot than it is Franklin, but it's Mims more than anyone else.
Yeah, if I was stacking it up, I like the Knicks, Sutton, Mims. But I will say one of the most interesting things I think from this game, there's 2 things actually, and they're just a side note, and then I'll give mine. One is the Broncos D. You want to slice and dice? Might be our guy Titletown's double dip season. You get Marvin Mims with the Broncos D, and that's a way to cut into that ownership because no one's really playing Marvin Mims. And what if you get like the kick return or the punt return on top of some of the other factors? There really is opportunity there based on his other stuff that you could see him get. He's actually got a ceiling opportunity as well. You could see that happen at just 3,500. The spot leaves it open for the afternoon. Also, by the way, if you are going the Bo Nix stack, like Bo Nix, Sutton, Mims or something, Lil Jordan Humphrey, revenge game on the other side. And he was used quite a bit actually with Dart. So has been used quite a bit, I should say, and out there quite a bit as well since the neighbors stuff. So it's just interesting if you want to go for that, but it's not narrative street. It's leverage lane. But I think obviously there's a lot of leverage in going to cutting into the Broncos D, or actually stacking that game up because just nobody's landing on that game at all. And I think like it as well. Real
quick there, the bring back that I would use is Theo Johnson. Theo Johnson had a very good game against New Orleans, 2 touchdowns, 6 receptions on 7 targets, and then was really bad, kind of non-existent against Philly. But Philly has been the hardest matchup for tight ends for the 2nd consecutive year now. So I'm going to give them a total pass on I'm going to give Theo a total pass on not being more productive against Philly. And Denver they've been good against tight ends, but they've also shown a little bit of a weakness to the middle of the field, which is where a lot of Theo Johnson stuff has happened. So I don't mind the Theo bring back at all. That said, it hasn't simmed well for me again, because all of those savings don't do enough for me. Where like I can get enough savings just from using MIMS as a one-off. I don't need to go to the entire game stack. So
Right.
that's why I'm not going to go
that
that
route. The other
route.
thing too is actually Slayton is doubtful for week 7. So it's actually part of that as well. It just could add to it even further. But yeah, like you said, it's not necessarily needed. It's just where you're landing. If this is a spot that makes sense to you and this is your lane, then I got no problem if you want to build it out that way, because you will definitely get to different lineup construction when you go with this. And this could be the first time we see this of the, sort of this example that I brought up of if you get all the other pieces where it's like, holy shit, they had all these top running backs. They had everything else in their lineup that were good plays on paper, made sense. They just needed Nix, Mims, Humphrey to come through. And again, it's a lot to ask for. It probably won't sim well to Alex's point when people ask like, how much is too chalky? We talked about this yesterday on our interview of like, when people say, the answer was given to how much is too chalky or how much is too contrarian. You have a process for that. And we went through it on that episode yesterday. So I love that. The chat brought this up. You were trying to spoil it the whole way. I will not be paying you, Envious, but I'm definitely going. He's joking, but I will be going to the Chargers spot here. I will bring it up again. I think the Brissett thing was a lot more of a product of the Colts thing than it was the Brissett thing. So for me, Herbert and Jonathan Taylor. And then I'm going to leave it at that because I like all those guys. I think the other really interesting part, while you could play them both, Allen, Quentin Johnston, Ladd, all of those guys do leverage, or I guess you say leverage, are pivots off of Rice in that area. You could still play Rice, but at least you'll land somewhere different and still have that spot available for the afternoon if you do want to make moves. Like, you're not too far away. If we get the Debo news late and he's in, and less people have the room for that now, it's like now you could get the Debo. So there's a lot of different things you can do with this stack. I will keep that in mind when I'm building them, to have some that are a bit more unique in the morning so that I also have the opportunity to just stay put if I want, but I could go to Washington, Dallas. The other thing I'll say is Quentin Johnston is the one that if I was picking one right now that I do like. You brought up the wide receiver 2 thing. I would still have him as that, but even aside, limited on Wednesday, full practice starting Thursday. It's not like this is some major, it's not like the other scenarios that we've seen where guys are coming back from a tough spot. So I think you could see him just work right back in. I know they're down left tackle still, but I just think the product of just a totally different spot here. I think we could see the Chargers do some damage. So Herbert, Jonathan Taylor, putting those two together. I think Herbert, we could also see, Taylor also moonwalk back a little as these other running backs pick up steam with the Dallas-Washington game, with Breece Hall, with Judkins, with Swift if he plays and people aren't on. Caleb Williams. Didn't talk a lot about that Chicago spot, but just all those mentions make it so we still see a guy like Jonathan Taylor being kept in check. And he actually went up in price after last week, I think, but yet now, of course, nobody wants him. He didn't do anything for them last week. So how could you go back to him this week? We've seen it plenty of times. So I'm going to be in on that. Any thoughts on that? Any final thoughts from you before we get out of here?
Yeah, one other thing I'll add here. You mentioned the fact that you thought the Brissett stuff was more about the Indy defense. I also think the Kamani Vidal stuff was a lot more about the Miami defense than anything else. I don't think the Chargers are going to be able to run the ball effectively with this backfield. So especially in this game environment against an Indianapolis offense that has really been firing on all cylinders this year, there's a chance that we could get a 50 drop back kind of game from Herbert. And man, when he does that, he can support 2 of these guys for ceiling performances easily. I even think that you could build a lineup that was Herbert, Ladd, QJ, and Keenan. The only thing there is I'd probably also then want Rashee Rice in the flex, because I think it's unlikely that all 3 of them beat Rashee Rice. So just play them all together. But I think that's a really viable way to go here as well. And you just say Herbert's going nuclear. And the other point there is you don't need all 3 of them to have ceiling performances. Especially in small field stuff. If one of them has a ceiling performance, one of them is pretty good, and the other is fine, that's probably good enough. If Herbert is smashing and your bring back is smashing, and you've got some good pieces elsewhere in the lineup. So I think this is probably my route as well. I love the fact that it's your leverage lane. I'm probably leaning Herbert stacks over the Dak doubles, but I still want to leave that open because I think both work. And because I feel so strongly about Mims, I do feel like, hey, I have that separator to help that Dallas lineup go. And the only thing I will say there is like Mims is also the 4:00 game. So it's not like I'm getting that information early enough to use that to help me make the Washington Dallas decision.
Yeah, you said something there. You use all your wide receiver slots. Don't tempt me with a good time from the same game. That's something always I've talked about for years and been open to. I think it's really interesting when people, just can't decide, but especially in the single entry, which is, again, if you're playing the $12 single entry, yes, you got to make a bit of a decision. That's where you could see somebody find a spot, but you have spots to open then because this is an afternoon game. There's a ton of options that could slot in there. I will also say that this is interesting for the fact that Vidal, who we didn't talk a ton about, but if Haskins is ruled out, he popped up questionable yesterday. If he ends up getting ruled out, I think we would see the Vidal ownership go up more. And in like your large field stuff, for those, I know we spend time mostly on 1 to 20 max, but if you're playing like portfolio stuff, in a 150 set, I think, yes, you could get some Herbert with Vidal as a way to get different there. But I think leveraging that could end up being a thing if we get that news as well. So hopefully that is helpful from that perspective. Was there something else I wanted? There was a couple other things I wanted to say. What was it here? Somebody said it in the chat. Oh, this one. Yeah. Like this is funny. I think it was like Baseball DFS on X. He always posts like, trolling and stuff. And he said he came out last week. It had like 2 million views. Probably going to get a nice little payment from old X creator account. But he'd said sorry guys, I was late with my plays, but I got them out now. And he posted the optimal lineup after the slate was over. The thing is, Uzi, this is like you do find out the plays on Sunday night. That's when you find out what the plays are. We're going to have our takes. We're going to have our thought process. But at the end of the day, we are looking at scenarios. So we are sort of looking at scenarios, but promoting process, right? So it's like we're saying the process to get there. You'll find your lane. It'll work out for some one week, not the other, this, that, and the other. We all play the same game. That's why we should root each other on when we don't have a chance and others do. If Alex is crushing it and I can't win this week, I want to see Alex do well because he put his hard work in and made this happen. But everyone's promoting plays. And at the end of the day, they're going to be right on some, wrong on some. The internet's a wild place. You can clip only the ones you're right on. You can delete the ones you were wrong on. It's insane from that perspective. All we want to do is promote process, education. Both Alex and I, SHIPIT Nation, FTN, his own personal stuff, etc. We all do a ton when it comes to that. That's really what this is all about. And we appreciate this. People that do love coming here to see it. If you enjoy it, smash the like. Make sure you're involved that way. What was the other thing, Alex? There was one more that I wanted to find here. Who is in this spot? Oh, yeah. I wanted to bring this up. So as funny as it is that I just sort of made that a thing, do you think there's any scenario here where the Patriots just put it on the Titans for the Vrabel revenge? That's narrative street, but we've got to the end of leverage lane now, by the way, so we can take a quick curb. That was something somebody brought up about the Lions going. Remember when Dan Campbell, it was a couple different spots, obviously, like back the revenge game spot against Ben Johnson, quote unquote, and running it up, but also then the fact that the Ravens pumped them before, and then he goes back and they pump the Ravens back. Do you see anything like that? Obviously, the team still has to execute on it, but could you see a spot here where the Drake May Patriot stuff just try and run it up the whole game?
Yeah, I do think it's possible. I'd rather play that just by using the Patriots defense.
Yeah.
I'm not really interested in any of the Patriots guys. Like, I think to your point about like, look, we'll know what the optimal lineup is Sunday night. I think there's a decent chance that any of these Patriots are in the optimal. But I think the hard part is they're probably getting there from touchdowns and not overall production and from a great game environment. So like Stevenson can have 2-3 touchdowns. He could also be really inefficient, score 0 touchdowns and totally kill you like he did last week. It's also only a matter of time for him, especially like he needs to be efficient because he's got the fumbling woes. So if he's not efficient and they don't trust him to not turn the ball over, he's not going to play. So it's weird. I also think like Steph Diggs is their best receiver by far, but he doesn't really play when they're out ahead and they're in a lot of, run first situations. So do you go with him or do you go with Booty or do you go Hunter Henry? Demario Douglas is now getting deep shots as well, even though he's like a career slot guy. It's way too hard, I think, to predict New England stuff for me. I'm not going there at all.
Yeah, you could try and run it back. I know Booty had a huge week last week. I think the interesting call is probably the Henry spot, but like you said, playing the defense might just be the way to get it done there. All right. Let the people know everything about that you've got going on this week, Alex, where they can find you, anything else you're working on, and then we'll get out of here.
The usual. Find me at Alex Blickle1 on Twitter. All the links for FTN stuff. Use promo code Blick for 10% off there. And if you want to check out my Discord, use promo code Leverage for 10% off there.
Yeah, if you guys want to go to shipitnation.com, use code SHIP19. You can get 5 days for $19 on the core or starter monthly all access plan. Be able to check out the Stone. That's what I've been looking off this whole way. You'll get the report cards there. The stack rankings have been on fire. If you guys have any other questions, shoot me a DM, add me on X at ToeTagginTambo. We'll see what we can do to take care of you. For Alex, for myself, ToeTagginTambo, let's ship it.